Hello and welcome to the Position 6 podcast. My name is Dan Offen, aka Mr. Big Jams. In this show, I get to know people involved in the Dota 2 scene and we talk about everything Dota related, aside from reckoning you could play a good game of Meepo if you actually tried, although you know you never would be able to. As you'll be able to see with your actual eyes, I'm now releasing episodes in collaboration with Join Dota. They will usually be video episodes with a video intro and a video outro, although occasionally I will have to still do an audio episode. My preference is for audio episodes as they give me a greater flexibility with editing and also give my guests a buffer of not having to be on camera the whole time just to make themselves feel more comfortable. This week, due to technical issues at both of our sides, is a audio episode only, but maybe in the future, hopefully I plan to do video interviews, which I think people will generally prefer, but I have to admit it will not always be possible. So I'm very excited about working with Join Dota and I think it could do a lot for the podcast. For those people who prefer to listen on their podcast apps, that's still going to be available and I don't think anything about the actual podcast is ever going to change. So please don't feel worried that what you like or maybe even love, if I hope, is going to change. It's all going to be there as always. Just now, there's more options. This week's episode though, I'm very excited to say, is with the wonderful LD. LD is one of the stalwarts of Dota and he's appeared at multiple internationals. He now runs Beyond the Summit, having retired from casting, one of the most successful broadcasting agencies in esports across the whole world, producing content for multiple games, not just Dota, although I think Dota is still partially LD's focus. I spoke to him about a huge range of things. I'm very excited and I think you're going to enjoy it a lot. If you'd like to talk about the episode where you're listening to it, aside from on Twitch, you can join the Position 6 Discord channel, which should be listed in the description, or contact me on Twitter at Daniel Offen, and that's spelled Daniel and then OFFEN. So follow me there if you want to chat or get in contact with me to offer any feedback or comments. If you want to support me financially, there's a Patreon which should be listed in the description as well. So please head over there if you want to make a little bit of a contribution. And the episode will start very soon. So just to kick off, it's been roughly just over a year since you stepped away officially from casting. When you look back at the decision to step away, and I'm aware it happened with you starting a new business, did it feel like quite a big decision?
Wow, has it really already been a year? That's crazy. Yeah, it's a good question. So I think it didn't feel like a huge decision. I guess a month or two ago, I was just going through some old emails and I had really started to focus less on casting back, I want to say around 2016 or so. I began casting in 2012. And that was pretty much my main focus. As Beyond the Summit grew, that slowly changed. So for me, it was more of a gradual process, but I don't think the community necessarily saw that. It was from their perspective, I think the casual Dota fan, it was, hey, where's LD? He's not casting as much. And there was often kind of this assumption that I wasn't, if you're not casting and you're talent, it's almost like you're not doing anything at all. And I think a lot of talent run into this issue. So that was part of why I ultimately wanted to write that blog is not really because anything had hugely changed on my end. It was more just kind of crystallizing a gradual process where I was only casting very infrequently by that point, and I felt like I wasn't able to really do full justice to the games, and nobody wants to kind of be a shadow of themselves in anything they do, and I did start to feel like it was getting to that point. Dota's a very hard game to keep up with. There's far more significant changes in the meta and with balance patches. I follow CSGO. I've watched a little League of Legends. I've occasionally watched some Overwatch, Rocket League, but nothing changes nearly as dramatically as the rules of Dota. So if you're not playing it day to day, at some point it does get kind of hard to keep up as a caster, or at the very least you need to be watching constantly, and that just wasn't possible for me at that point.
But when you make an announcement like that, kind of in a blog in the way you do, there must be a sense of occasion to it, even if it's a long series of decisions that have led to that. There must be kind of a feeling of retirement and stepping away as being quite big.
Yeah, it was funny actually because I didn't really view it as anything momentous. I did view it as a bunch of smaller decisions and just changes in my day to day as Beyond the Summit grew. But I think from the fans' perspective, certainly that wasn't the case. I think it seemed like more of a black and white thing, which is why I was wanted to make sure I explained things properly when I wrote the blog, and I definitely wasn't the only one in that position. It's funny because I posted the blog, and like an hour or two later, Merlini messaged me and basically said like, "I'm glad you posted your blog. Now I can make my announcement too." So but I think with him, it was very much the same thing. He had been traveling and attending a lot of events, and then I think he started to get a little tired of the grind, started to turn down some of the less appealing events where the conditions weren't as good or the travel was more onerous. And then his process probably happening over 6 months or something, not several years. But he kind of came to the same conclusion of, I can't be my best Ben Wu when it comes to casting, so I don't want to do it anymore. And that's pretty much how I felt. I couldn't really do the caster title LD the justice deserves. So I wrote the blog, and I think the community mostly understood. It was probably music to the ears of anyone who didn't like my casting, and every caster does have their haters. It was nice to see all the people who said they're going to miss me, and I would love to cast again, but I don't want to feel like I'm half-assing it. So whether or not I'll ever find the time to really focus on Dota, I can't say. But if I do cast again, it will be with a lot of prep, and of feeling confident that I can do the game's justice.
Do you feel happier having stepped away? Has it been a good decision for you?
What is happiness anyway? Yes and no. I think I miss the passion of casting. There really is nothing like being in front of a roaring crowd, and when you are really feeling it as a caster, it's almost like playing an instrument in a way. Like you can feel the crowd like reacting, not just to the gameplay, but also to the way you're presenting it to them. And really good casters, it's almost like a dance between your voice and your control of words and your choice of vocabulary and the crowd's emotions. And so it's very, you kind of get in the zone, similar to how it is for, I think, a player in the heat of competition. So I definitely miss that experience. My day to day doesn't have anything like that. It certainly has a lot of stress. It has a lot of challenging, intellectually challenging things. I talk a lot for my work, so I still find myself hoarse, or if not losing my voice. But every caster has to enjoy kind of being an entertainer, and being a bit of a public figure. I wouldn't go so far as to say all talent are narcissists or anything like that, but there's a bit of a cocky streak you generally want to have to feel like you're the best, and you have to bring that energy to the cast the same way that a player needs to bring that confidence to their gameplay, to really nail it. And so it's very satisfying when you deliver a great cast and you feel like you really made that game as good as it could be for the fans, and they reward that and let you know that they really enjoyed it. So working behind the scenes, you don't often get that kind of direct interaction. I do miss the travel aspect of it as well, and getting to meet fans in person, seeing a lot. I'm friends with a lot of the players and talent in Dota, and it's kind of sad not to get to see them as much day to day. But I guess that's kind of the negatives and the downsides. But I think the upside is the lifestyle is very, for me at least, I found it pretty unsustainable. It's difficult to be on a healthy sleep schedule, to exercise, to eat properly. These are generally things that go by the wayside when you are living on airplanes and in hotels. And although for a lot of fans, they look at it like, oh, it's really cool. It's this glamorous lifestyle. You get to travel to all these fun, exotic locations and see all these cool things. And the reality for most casters is, you get on the plane, you probably don't sleep very well. You land, you go straight to the hotel, you sleep. If you're lucky, you have one day to acclimate. If not, you cast the next day. And your day's long, 8 to 12 hours. Maybe you have a little time to grab dinner at night, you crash, you rinse, repeat. And then as soon as the event's over, an after party, if you choose to go, and then an early flight back home. So, it's a fun and invigorating lifestyle when you're in your 20s. As you start to get a little older, your 30s, or God forbid, 40s, 50s. I think it's hard to have that kind of lifestyle, have a family, have kids. You look at casters like Coddle Guy, for example, who has a son now, and God forbid you have a pet. I know Gods has a dog, and that makes it very difficult for him when he goes to events right now. So I just think that kind of lifestyle is kind of incompatible with, I'll call it, adulting. If you're single, and you don't have a lot of attachments, I think you can do it. But as soon as if you want to have anything kind of outside of your work, it gets really tricky.
Do you think it's possible to be able to not half-ass, but do casting less than full-time and still be at the top of your game? Or do you have to give it your all to be there?
Okay. So this is kind of a complicated question, but I think, of course, for anyone to be at the absolute pinnacle of their profession, they have to do everything they can, right? If you want to be, the Michael Jordan of basketball, or, the John Madden of casting, like, you can't just kind of put in a decent amount of work and expect to be the absolute best. You really have to grind. Obviously, you need talent too, but you also have to put in that hard work. So I think my style of play-by-play casting was always a little different from some of the other play-by-play casters. Certainly, I feel like I could bring the hype, and I could just bring excitement to the cast. But where I was always a bit different, especially in my earlier years from, say, Toby or from OD Pixel now, is that I tried to focus a little more on the strategy and not have quite such a strict dichotomy between the play-by-play caster and the color commentator. Normally, you have the play-by-play guy, and all he does is kind of tell the general story, set the stage, and bring the excitement. And then you have the analyst, the Cinderin or Merlini, Fogged, or whoever, and their job is purely normally to chat with you, but more just to analyze the game and provide the strategic insight. I always had more of a kind of hybrid role as a play-by-play caster, and when you cast that way, it puts a lot of pressure on you to stay up with the game. Like, if Toby is a bit outdated on some of his mechanics, normally he could get away with that, I would say, within certain parameters. When you're expected to also kind of, I think Capitalist is kind of an example of this too, where he's very good at the game and he does often bring up analytical talking points. You have to know what the good points to bring up are. Otherwise, it just takes away from the analyst. So it's hard to be a caster in that mold and not play the game on a very regular basis, or at least watch a lot of competitive Dota. I could have adjusted my style. I think I did over the years. I became more of a pure play-by-play caster and focused a little bit less on the analytical side. I still tried to bring a lot of the player history and storylines to the table, which I think is something I learned from Luminous over the years, and just having cast for a relatively long time was a bit easier for me. But the actual game mechanics, that sort of had to take a back seat as I had less time to devote to play, watching the game.
What you said there was quite interesting in terms of I've been talking to quite a lot of casters, especially newer people like Mopsy and Lizard, and the general feedback I've had from them, and I've asked the question I'm going to ask you here quite a lot about thinking about your style and how it differs from other people, is that they don't think about their style and how it differs from other people, and that their focus is entirely on being good. But it seems from what you're saying there that that's something that you did think about quite a lot, how you differed from the rest of the crowd. Is that true at the time, or is that a retrospective thought about your career?
A little of both. I think I've gained a little more perspective on where I kind of stood in the caster hierarchy or spectrum or whatever you want to call it over time. But for sure, I did think about it. And I think for me, I felt like style was always important because running Beyond the Summit, and as we grew as a studio, myself and Gods were casting so much Dota that it was not possible to just have a stable co-caster. You look at, OD Pixel and Fogged are a bit of a duo. For a while, I guess Toby and Merlini were doing a lot of casting together. There's Cap and Blitz is probably the closest thing Dota has had to a fairly stable duo over the years. But we were casting at crazy hours, and a lot of the co-casters back then were either players. I think when Merlini started casting, he had a job in finance. When Winter started casting with me, he was in Southeast Asia, obviously, big time zone difference there. He was engaged, I believe, and he was playing. So it's not like I could just have the same co-caster every time. And so because of that, what works really well with Winter might not work well with Merlini, might not work well with Gods, might not work well with Lumi. And so I think when I first started, I was primarily just casting with Lumi. And so we had a really good back and forth. We had a style. We both kind of did analyst and we did hype. And I think, well, it probably wasn't everyone's cup of tea. We felt pretty comfortable with the dynamic. But as Beyond the Summit grew, there were times where I cast like 18 hours in 24 hours, and I might just squeeze in a nap, a couple hours at night, and maybe an hour or two in between matches during the day. You're not going to find a co-caster who's going to do that. I was willing to commit that kind of time and energy because I was growing a business, and I frankly have a pretty, some might call it work ethic, others might call it being a workaholic, but definitely a strong drive. But I don't think most other people are willing to make those kinds of sacrifices, especially not day in day out. It's one thing to work one event and put in a lot of time and then have a long downtime, but we would go from one online tournament to the next, especially as Beyond the Summit grew, and like from 2013 to 2015. So yeah, you have to have an adaptive style, or all your co-casters have to just kind of fit around you. And I think that's what Toby always excelled at. He had a very clear style, and still does. And Toby is just going to be Toby, kind of goofy, maybe a little off color sometimes, very strict play by play. And he's just going to grab the reins anytime there's a team fight. He's going to yell over his co-caster and bring the hype and make sure that no exciting moments get missed. That's just his style. And so whoever he was casting with would work around him. I felt like my strength was facilitating and bringing out the best in other people. So I would always try to mix it up. So if I did some casting with Period Flax, with Sir Action Slacks, with Bruno, I'll call these more kind of like entertaining co-casters. And so with them, I would try to joke more. I would not necessarily interrupt them to do hype play-by-play. I would kind of almost give them the room to breathe and make it fun. If I was casting with Winter, we have a good back and forth humor wise, but he also has really great insight. So I want to give him a lot of space to do that. Someone like Merlini, he can loosen up and be funny, but he's kind of going to talk when he feels like it. So there's a little more filling you have to do. So it really was a different blend. I mean, obviously, I still have some kind of fundamental things I always will do in a cast, but I definitely look to mix it up and to keep it fresher for the viewers and for myself. And also, I think just to bring out the best of my co-casters. So yeah, I always viewed myself as slightly more of a chameleon caster. I would change my stripes a bit depending on the situation. And that doesn't just go for co-casters, that goes for the event too. So, a summit, a couch cast, maybe it's a little more relaxed, a little more banter. You're at TI, you're looking to make this spectacle as big and exciting as it possibly can be.
What I've noticed in quite a lot of newer casters, and I think they're all very, very talented, and maybe this is something that you'll have an opinion on as someone involved in their success. Do you think that people at the moment are not making that effort to differentiate themselves from each other a little? Because I think at the moment people are very good, but they're sounding quite similar to each other. And I don't know where that differentiation is coming in. Is that something you agree with, or am I way off?
I don't think you're way off. I think we're at an interesting time for Dota casters, and I should put a caveat on all of this that I have watched some Dota. I caught some of the Dream League Major. I watched some of the Star Ladder Major. But I definitely have not been watching 6 to 8 hours of Dota a day. So with that big caveat in mind, I feel like there's a lot more young blood, especially in the play-by-play side, going to a lot of these events. We've seen Moxie do some events. Lyrical just did TI, and he's been doing some. I guess as far as older, kind of more established casters go, like Odie Pixel has been around the block for a while. Toby, of course, he's been around, forever. I guess outside of those two, I'm trying to think who else is like a long-standing play-by-play caster. Capitalist, though he hasn't been at too many of the DPC events that I'm aware of, so I haven't seen much of him. And so you see more of these newer faces, and I think for newer casters, they do tend to emulate what their idols or like the big names will do. So when I was coming up as a caster, originally I took a lot of inspiration from Luminous and his very kind of conversational, fun, more analytical and historical approach. Then I discovered Toby and started to watch his casting more, and I kind of took bits and pieces of that and really bringing the hype and trying to find that big moment in a team fight. And I look at the new casters now, and obviously Odie Pixel, he's known as the rap god. He talks very fast. That's sort of his claim to fame, but he's often able to do it in a way where he's actually pointing out most of the exciting things in the fight. I do feel like I've noticed a trend where some of the new casters, they kind of try to emulate that rap god thing, but it kind of comes out sounding like gibberish some of the time, or even if their words are intelligible, it just seems like they're saying a lot of stuff quickly for the sake of doing it. And that was perhaps Owen played it up a little bit from time to time because it was entertaining. And he was good at it, and Reddit and Twitter all loved him for it. But really, usually he was just able to do that and point out things that mattered in fights. And so I think there are little trends like that you'll see with newer casters where, I mean, Moxie does this a fair amount with the rap goddess thing, and she is very talented vocally. But sometimes I listen to casters just trying to rush and cram too many words in, and there is something to be said for silence having value in the broadcast. I think the CS:GO casters do this really well. I listened to I forget who it was, maybe Henry G casting recently, and it's okay to just have a pause and there's no talking at all. And so sometimes that gives your viewers a chance to breathe. Dota is a pretty visual game, and the vast majority of viewers are watching on Twitch. They're not just listening. I know Zayori made Dota Radio, and he tried to pioneer that radio cast, but obviously he's not doing it anymore. And the audience is ultimately fairly niche, especially for live games. It's just too complicated of a game to really fully understand what's going on purely from listening. So it's okay to let the action speak for itself and kind of breathe. And even in a team fight, you can't call out everything. It's really not possible. So I just use that only as an example. There are definitely others that I'm probably not thinking of. But yeah, I think some of the newer casters, there's always going to be like this finding your identity as a caster process that you go through. I went through it for sure. There were times where I felt like I was copying Toby. There were times where I felt like I was copying Luminous. You're always going to take those little bits and pieces. I just hope that all of the newer and up and coming casters can bring something unique to the table, whether it's their sense of humor, whether it's their wordplay, whether it's their anecdotes or their knowledge of player history. Because otherwise, it can come across as I don't know. That's when fans start to feel like, oh, you're trying too hard, or you're faking, or like you'll hear fans say like, oh, fake hype about casters. Sometime that used to be a big thing. I think American casters tend to get a little more hate from the European audience just because the American style of casting, is a bit different.
Mm. And I think American voices are is what we hear from Europe is quite hype driven.
Exactly. Yeah. And like I watched like the NFL playoffs this year, and it's there's this guy that everyone hates doing ESPN's Monday Night Football, and well, they didn't hate the play-by-play caster that much. I forget his name, but he's a little too loud and excited about things that aren't necessarily that exciting, and that's something that Americans are just used to, and so you might tend to overcompensate and commit to that style too much. I think it's just an evolution process. Every caster will eventually find their voice if they get enough opportunities, or they won't, and the fans will get sick of them. But yeah, I just think having an identity and really understanding what you can bring to the table that's different from other people is important to keep it fresh and to give viewers a reason to want you over the other guy or gal, as the case may be.
Do you think there's a identity or style that's missing in the scene at the moment? That there's a niche that perhaps needs to be filled?
I think. I think Dota is pretty blessed as far as casting talent goes. I watch a lot of CS:GO. They have some really talented casters kind of at the top of the community, but Dota has a really deep community because the grassroots scene is so big. A lot of the tournaments happen online, which usually means that there's not a budget to hire the best casters because they're just too expensive. So what the downside of that is fans are like, oh, why isn't OD Pixel casting this? Or I want my Merlini, this sucks. The upside of that is that it gives a lot of opportunity for lesser known casters, the Beat Cops, the Tsunamis, the Moxies, the Trents of the world to kind of make their claim. Like OD Pixel would never have been discovered if Dota or would have had a hard time being discovered, at least in my opinion, if Dota was anything like CSGO or some of these other scenes, because they're just so LAN focused. There's so many events that really want the talent on site. You're going to go with people who are more established more often than not, or at least semi-established. So, yeah, I think there's a lot more opportunities nowadays or in Dota, I should say, for up-and-coming casters to get a shot and try and get their names out there. And as a result, I think Dota has just more options. We've got our meme casters, our Bulldogs, our Slaxes of the world. Occasionally maybe throw Pier and Flax in that mix. You've got your hardcore stats guy in Nahaz. We used to see a little bit of that from, way back in the day. Bruno brought that, and then kind of that fun style. I think we have a lot of fun shows. Moonduck really does that with Midas Mode. They did it a bit with Captain's Draft. I think we do it to a certain extent with the Summit. You get to hear the player voices a lot in Dota because of the DPC streaming policy. I think for me, it's a pretty good mix. The majors will normally bring that more kind of exciting hype style, DreamHack being an outlier with their Dream League. and then you've plenty of entertaining casts. I think if anything, maybe there's a lack of casters who are really interested in like the history and the player stories, like dating way back. I think, I'm probably going to sound a little biased. I think that was one thing that myself and Luminous always did well. I think if you look at like say Monty in League of Legends, that was something that him and Doa were very good at. Uh, I mean, Overwatch is such a new game. I just don't think you can really bring that much of a history to it, even though they moved to it. In CS:GO, Thorin comes to mind. Obviously, very controversial personality, but you really can't argue. He can go all the way back to like the 1.6 days, and I would love to see a little more of that because there's just so many Dota tournaments now. Historical context of those old storylines are what keep things fresh. So I think it's harder for newcasters because a lot of them just don't have that history. They weren't there back then. Maybe they weren't even playing Dota, or if they were, they weren't watching competitively. I struggled to keep up with some of the old stuff that Lumi, knew about when I started. So that's just a tough one to do if you're coming in a bit newer. But yeah, I think Dota's evolved a lot. I think our panelists tend to be a little awkward. They're not as comfortable with bantering and taking shots as some of the other talent pools. I know Per just talked about this quite a lot. But I think we've gotten better over the years for sure.
Perfectly segueing on to what I was next going to ask. What's the main way that you think the Dota scene's got better or changed? Because you've been in it pretty much since the start. What's the biggest shifts that you've seen that you don't think necessarily fans will pick up on?
Well, the biggest issue that Dota talent had in the early days was we just were not experienced working on camera. My first time ever being really on camera at a live event was the International 2012. I had done some webcam stuff, some, educational guides and podcasts, but sitting in your computer chair in the comfort of your bedroom or your living room is not the same as being on stage in front of a crowd. There's just certain ways that posture yourself, project your voice, look at the camera. You stare at it for too long and you kind of creep people out. You look away too much and they think like you're shy. Or it might come across like you're ignoring your co-caster. So there's really a mix of behaviors, whether it's verbal or nonverbal, that ultimately let the viewers feel comfortable and like you're polished. And that's just something you have to experience and ideally get training. Like you look at games like Overwatch and League of Legends, they have, LCS and LEC. So these talent are on camera like week after week after week, day after day after day. I believe they even get vocal coaching and, on camera training. They have people picking out their clothes, wardrobe. Overwatch League, pretty similar. Their matches are like in the Blizzard arena 4 or 5 days a week. Most Dota casters come up as bedroom casters, and then all of a sudden they're thrown on a desk or on a casting setup in front of a crowd. So I think that was the biggest transition that a lot of talent had to make. A lot of us were very awkward. I remember when there was an event we did in 2014, I believe, the Alienware Cup. Navi went to China, and all the best Chinese teams and the old Navi, this is like when Puppy, Dendy, and Havos were together. Basically, they played in this big tournament. Navi ended up winning. Spoiler alert. And this is actually the tournament where the Havos 4 meme was built.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Was born, I should say. That was Bruno's idea, by the way. He wanted to make the rankings fun, so we have to take creative risk. Someone's got to be 4, Not everyone can be 1 or 10.
So it was a joke. It wasn't a serious bit of stats.
But there was a moment on one of the days, like in a break, when Too Good was there and he was hosting, and he turned to the other talent, myself and Chloe's like, what the fuck are you guys doing? Like, basically, we got a good talk and a very instructive lesson about, not being awkward as shit on camera. And he's like, stop just staring at the camera. You're sitting right next to each other. You have to interact with your co-casters. Like, you want them to feel like you're all in a room together, not like you're in little isolation pods. And it seems obvious looking back on it. And obviously this was a long time ago and James had a lot more experience than all of us, but we learned a lot just from that little experience. And, talent now, there are more live events in Dota. More events are bringing the talent on site, especially in English. All the majors and minors are, and I think last season there was like 20 of those. This season there's 10. When you look back to 2012 to 2015, some talent might go to 1 or 2 events a year top. So that's maybe 5 to 10 days of on-camera time. No training. That suddenly the lights are on and you're on camera and you don't even know you're live. You don't have a producer in your ear. You have no rehearsal. So I think that's a huge change, and it's just a natural byproduct of having more live events, more camera time for talents. I still think Dota is really lacking that direct professional guidance that some of these other leagues have, but I understand it's pretty cost prohibitive. It's already hard for Dota events to make money, let alone bringing in like a vocal coach or an on-camera mentor. That's probably not the budget. So I think that is a big area of improvement overall.
You mentioned James there. I wasn't going to ask him about him actually, but it kind of suddenly occurred to me that was Too Good's involvement within professional Dota a big moment of change in it? Because it feels like he raised the game quite a lot. Would you agree with that?
I think he did a lot, especially for the talent, because most of the talent, as we call them now in Dota, were people who were just Dota fans or Dota players who had never worked in broadcast, had never worked in esports. When Bruno started, he was a guy who was just passionate about stats and programming. When I started, I was working as a software and business consultant who just loved playing video games. Lumi was studying English. Toby had acted, he had some kind of vocal training and stuff, and he had cast other games before that. But it's not like any of us went to sports broadcasting school, right? And there was no really accepted practices as far as payments, or what are reasonable rates. At the second international, Valve was not even planning to pay the talent, I believe, originally. And that's not to say that they were trying to take advantage of anyone, per se. They just, no one had brought it up. And, for a lot of people, it was just exciting to go to the event. When Ice Frog invited me and Lumi, I didn't say, hey, how much do you pay me? I said, oh my God, I'm going to the international. This is amazing. Right? I think James helped us all a lot to understand our value, to understand, how kind of the business should work, what were fair rates, and then obviously, how to make a good show, how to make it entertaining. That was always what the Good Studio did really well. That not necessarily the most polished, not necessarily the best production value, probably didn't have the best hype caster. I think towards the end, Odie Pixel joined them, or at least did some work with them. But what they did always have was they always had entertainment. And a lot of that was James, but he had an eye for talent. He brought in Bruno, he groomed Scriff and Wepis, and he's given a lot of people jobs in esports. So I think he definitely, on the talent side especially, he deserves a lot of credit. And then, hey, you look on the player side, I believe Jerax owes a debt to the Good Studio. I think they were GD Studio Team B for a while.
Mm-hmm.
My memory's a little hazy here. But yeah, there are some top players who came through. Of course, we all remember TI4 Hub. So it gave a lot of memories. I think the Good Studio, really taught Dota people how to have fun. And that's something that you see living on today in Moonduck and things like the Summit. I won't give them all the credit for the entertainment, but they certainly deserve a lot of it.
And when you think about your involvement and Beyond the Summit's involvement in the development of Dota, what impact would you say that you've had as a producer of content?
Well, so I guess it depends on what phase you kind of look at, right? So in the early days, what I would say is simply we were bringing Dota to fans that otherwise would not have been broadcast. And so that's Chinese Dota, that's the Asia Pacific region. There were no English broadcasts of any of these tournaments back then. In the old days, in Dota 1, events would happen in China on a patch, and then the replay pack from that event might get released 6 months later or more. And by that point, it was probably a new patch or even 2 patches later, and all of the replays were outdated. If you could even play them, there might be a new Warcraft 3 map, that sort of or patch, that sort of thing. So it was like we were living almost like it was like time traveling to go watch Chinese and Asian Dota. And Toby, I believe, started to do like audio broadcasts. Lumi was doing these like he would cast replays, but we were really, I think, pioneers in broadcasting, bringing Asian Dota to the audience live, and that was a lot of networking. Most of that credit to Gods, who had built these relationships with the Chinese organizers, the TOs, a lot of the Southeast Asian ones, networked, attended events, met them. He lived in Thailand for a while and built relationships with Mineski. That was really where it all started. So I think that's our first legacy, is giving Asian Dota both just simply like a broadcast, but more creating these player stories and personalities. A lot of that I credit to Winter, for me personally, helping me to learn more about these players' personalities, what they were like off camera, what their backgrounds were. But there has been for a long time, and especially until the last few years, there was always this stereotype of, all Chinese Dota players are the same, and that's just kind of an esports extension of the racist stereotype that all Asians look the same, right? And
Yeah.
it's understandable though from a fan's perspective why they might feel that way, because they don't see. It's sometimes hard to see the differences between the teams if they, oh, they're all picking the same heroes and they're from the same region, and I've never seen pictures of them and I've never seen them being themselves because there's a language barrier, the content is paywalled. So I think that was our biggest contribution early on. I think our biggest contribution, kind of when we grew beyond that, was really in creating interesting side content, whether that's Summit skits, whether it's involving players in the broadcast on the couch, and basically creating memorable events that aren't tied to the gameplay. A lot of my best Summit moments have nothing to do with what's going on in the matches. It isn't about, oh, EG won this match, DK won that match, or you remember when, Wings won a Summit. It's about, you remember the So Smart cast with No Tail on the couch, or do you remember the Jack visa immigration interview? Those types of things. Like that's to me the Summit legacy, and I think our legacy in Dota and what we've been able to bring to other games is creating what we call like more evergreen content that stays fresh almost indefinitely, or at least that's the goal anyway.
I think that's probably what you've achieved. When you look at the summit and how it ended up, is the style of the casual kind of style of the summit an accident, or was there ever a top-down strategy to creating that sort of atmosphere at those events?
So I think the very original idea, we've said this before, I think we even included it in the original Dota Summit announcement, was to do something inspired by Home Story Cup for the Dota community. So we were taking an established formula that had worked in StarCraft and attempting to apply it to Dota. I think it was a very different challenge because Dota is a team game. It was, team games by their nature, I think they're usually, well, I guess it's not a team game thing per se, but these players they tend to stay in a little bubble, right? Because there often are language barriers. They travel everywhere with their team, and so they're less likely to interact with competitors. And that's something like, especially I see this now watching Smash and the FGC events. The players are just more social because that's the nature of Smash and the FGC. You're primarily competing in person, sitting next to each other, in front of TVs. So you almost have to socialize. Otherwise, what the hell else are you going to do? But when you're a Dota player, CSGO player, you can spend most of your time practicing and playing matches online because, until recently, there really wasn't a great way to play, any 1v1 fighting game title online. Now they have net play for Melee and online play for the Switch and things like that. But that's only a very recent development. But yeah, in Dota, you can practice online, you can play online, you can build teams online. Hell, I had an entire Counter-Strike career when I was in high school, and I didn't meet any of my teammates for like the first 5 years. That's just not possible in a lot of these other communities. So that was a challenge we had to deal with. I guess there were a lot of unique things about running the summit in the early days because of just the title and its unique challenges that Home Story Cup never had. And I think where we really diverged from them is the content. What we do with our creative team, the skits, the side pieces. That's kind of the thing that I think really makes the summits unique. And not to say other events don't do video content, but I don't think anyone does it quite like we do.
Was the video content written to a certain style? Did you just try and make it good, or did you try and make it good in a certain way?
I won't claim that I'm really the primary driver of the content. I've been fortunate to meet some amazing people along the way. Dan, who is our content director, Ken or Hotbit, as many of you know him, is our creative director. These guys are pretty much, them and their teams are the people who are coming up with all the great ideas. So in the very early days, a lot of what we did wasn't even necessarily creating our own content. It was taking content that these like Chinese tournaments were already making and making sure it got translated and, just acquiring copies of it so we could reshare it with the Western audience. The very first big event that we did, G1 League, there's some very funny clips of, I think, Burning and Mushi amongst some other players. But yeah, I think overall, you just really have to embed yourself in a game and its culture to do content well. You have to know the memes, the storylines, you have to know your audience. You obviously have to have a great eye for what's entertaining or interesting. And that's really just about finding people who could honestly make any kind of content. Our video team could go work for, in my opinion, Hollywood or traditional sports or music, filming festivals, behind the scenes stuff, and they would be great at any of it because they're just great storytellers. And I think that's what you need to to stand apart in esports.
Is there anything coming up for Beyond the Summit? What's happening with the next tournament you're running?
The next announced event that we have is the Mortal Kombat 11 Summit. So it's our second FGC event. We're doing that early May. As far as Dota goes, I believe we've got a bunch of stuff in the works. Don't think anything's ready to be announced just yet. Some online stuff, some live stuff. The crew is helping out at OpenAI's event this weekend.
Okay.
So that should be fun. So be sure to check that out if you aren't already, to see if the bots can redeem themselves from last TI. But yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything else on the immediate horizon. Oh, we have MafiaCon. So this is that's happening later this month. For those who used to watch The Town for Dota, it's basically an open to the public Mafia event. We announced it at the Smash Ultimate Summit. And if that goes well, we'll probably look to expand it further. So there might be like an all-star component where you get to see more of your, fan favorite personalities competing. We feel like Mafia has taken on a life of its own at the summits. It's really popular with the Smash and FGC guys. Obviously a lot of the Dota talent and some of the players. I know CCNC, for example, obsessed with Mafia. But these guys, when you're into Mafia, you're really into Mafia. I guess I'll put it that way. So if you like Mafia, check that out. We will be broadcasting it. I think that's about it for now. There's more stuff in the works, but nothing I can share at this time.
Okay, so just before we kick off, aside from that, is there anything you'd like to bring up or plug yourself?
Well, obviously, thank you so much to the Dota community for all the support over the years, from the time when I had no idea what I was doing, casting in my bedroom, until, well, maybe I still had no idea what I was doing, but casting in front of a much larger audience in Battle Royale Hall. And it was a wonderful journey casting Dota all those years. Still follow the game. I hope to get to some events this year, and at least be able to do a bit of casting, if not do it full time ever again. But thanks for your support, guys, and for continuing to support us as we branch into other titles, other events. Dota will always hold a special place in our hearts, and so too will you guys. Aside from that, I mean, just a huge shout out to everyone at Beyond the Summit. We wouldn't be able to run the amazing events that we do without everyone from the creatives, the broadcast team, the project managers, the hospitality folks who make sure players and talent are happy, and so many others. I'm forgetting the salespeople who bring us sponsors. It is really a team effort, and I actually enjoy coming to work every day. And if you'd asked me how I feel about going to work back in 2011, I would have said I hate my job. So it's much happier now, and I'm very blessed to be doing something I love.
Thank you for listening to the Position 6 podcast, and a huge thanks to LD for appearing on it. I've been a long-term fan of his casting, so it was really great to catch up with him, and I hope you enjoyed listening to the episode as much as I enjoyed doing it. I also have to thank him for coming actually on twice, because the first episode I recorded of him got corrupted, so he's actually given up over 2 hours of his time to me, which I really appreciate, and I really think it shows the kind of man he is and how much support he's willing to give to up-and-coming people. So I really appreciate that, so a huge thanks to him. Thank you once again for all of your support so far. If you want to follow me on Twitter and share the podcast around, I can be found on Twitter at DanielOffen, and that's spelled Daniel and then O-F-F-E-N. Again, as I mentioned at the start of the episode, I do have a Patreon site which you can contribute if you want to help financially support me, which I do really appreciate. So I want to thank you people as a part of that. Firstly, Michael Wisniewski, who's always on the Discord and is a wonderful chap. Secondly, Chris Strong, who I also like very much. And also 115 and the entire Georgian Dota community, and why not the whole of Georgia as well. The country, not the state, and I couldn't care less about the state, if I'm honest, no. I'm joking. If you are from the state of Georgia, you are so welcome to listen. Anyway, next week I should be releasing an episode with Brooke from OpenAI, who you may have seen on this stream when they absolutely trounced OG 2-0. I'm really excited to be catching up with her because I've been a long-term fan of automation and machine learning, so I'm really looking forward to drilling down into the processes they used and also how they think they can be applied in the future to help improve Dota and also things outside of Dota. So tune in next week for that. That should be released next Wednesday, both on here and on my audio channels as well. Till then though, have a good week and I'll see you then.